Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast. Today on the show, we're covering a topic that's quite heavy, albeit necessary to talk about. I mean, the heaviest topics are always the most important ones. We are journeying through the path from conflict to violence in intimate relationships and getting an expert's insights on just how words can turn into physical wounds. Relationships counselor Hui Wen Tong is here with us today to guide us through this large web. Based in Singapore, she tends to draw on person-centered modalities and has 2 rabbits present in her sessions as well to often provide comfort to her clients, which I think is just so interesting. And outside of the clinic, she's also a martial arts instructor, which I just find so cool. Hi, Hui Wen. Thank you for joining us today on the show.
Hi,
How are
Marie.
you going?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm fine too. It's just really hot here in Melbourne at the moment, but I shan't complain about that too much. I know in Singapore, I grew up in Singapore, and I know the
All right.
humidity and heat's just far worse. But unfortunately, I've acclimated to too much. So I'm really curious to know, in your professional experience, what is the largest misconception about the conflict to violence pathway in intimate relationships?
Okay. There are a few misconceptions, right? I think the first misconception that I would like to highlight is that house fights are bad for relationships,
Mhm.
right? Some depends on the degree of the fight. If it's verbal, it is still okay. If it turns physical, then that's just beyond any turning point. But if fights are verbal and communicative and expressive in any forms at all, be it crying or shouting, it's actually good for relationships.
Yeah.
For the couples anyway.
Yeah. And is there any way to tell at all if this verbal expression would ever turn into physical conflict?
Yeah, so it usually starts with a lot of what we call, this is a bit primal here, we call it monkey dancing. So it starts with words, and then start with challenges, then start with pushing, and then it goes worse from there.
All right. That's really interesting. But before we go further into detail, we'd love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Hui Wen Tong? Now, my first question for you is, aside from martial arts, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I like to groom rabbits. So I work as a volunteer to groom rabbits. So we have this place called I think it's called the Vinci Club, and there are a few clubs in Singapore that save rabbits, abandoned rabbits. That's where I work to help to find abandoned rabbits or groom rabbits. That's what I love doing.
And are visitors allowed to these places, or would you have to
Yes, they are.
volunteer?
They pick their volunteers, of course, but they would welcome outsiders to join to help.
Okay. I've got to note this down for when I go back to Singapore. Because I love rabbits. I just can't keep one. They like, I've always loved rabbits. Do you have a favorite breed?
I don't have a favorite. I see all breeds are good. I don't have a favorite one.
That's really
they're all
sweet.
cute.
That's really sweet. And now I feel guilty because my favorite one is the Flemish giant. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Yes, those things.
the humongous ones.
Yes.
Have you ever seen one in person?
Not in Singapore because they could probably couldn't stand the weather because it's
Right.
too hot for
Yeah.
them.
It's really, really hot. But for those who are listening, a Flemish giant is essentially the size of like a small to medium sized dog.
So, oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you can bring the rabbit out for walks. They would just blend in to like the cats and the dogs being
Yes.
walked because that's how large they are. Um, Now, I realize that we've been talking a bit about rabbits. Um, I just can't help myself. They're so fluffy and adorable. Do you keep any at home?
I do. I have two of them.
What? Do they have their own like room? Because I heard that sometimes they do need their own room.
I keep them free range so they can. My whole place is theirs. So,
Oh wow, that's good news. I've always been like just very daunted by owning a rabbit because of how much they excrete. But that's amazing for you, and they must be so fun to cuddle. So now, aside from rabbits, now we've talked a bit about rabbits, like I said before. But before I get carried away, do you read any books?
yes. Recently, I just finished a book on the courage to be disliked.
Mhm.
Let me check the name of the author. The author is a Japanese, Fumitaki Koga. So he wrote about how we all we base our self-worth on how much we are liked by other people. And I really like how it relates to the work that I do with my clients, people who have tendencies where they people please, for example, they lack the courage. And this is usually what we work on in sessions with clients.
Yeah. So is that kind of in the vein of like the genre that you tend to lean towards with your books?
I would say so, yes. It's more towards anxiety, self-worth, self-help. How do we build better what we call a sense of self? Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually the genre I go with.
And what about films or TV shows? Are there any that you've enjoyed recently?
There's one that I recently I watched this. There's this recommendation from a peer therapist, and she recommended me to watch The Blue Eye Samurai. And it's totally unrelated to my therapy work. But I think we like it because we are both practicing the same martial arts. So we're doing Ninjutsu. So that's where Blue Eye Samurai comes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched.
Well, like there's no harm in that. I mean, sometimes you have to consume media that's completely irrelevant to, the line of work you're in, just to kind of like let off some steam. So that's completely fair and that's completely justified. But as for podcasts, are there any that you listen to?
I recently listened to a podcast. I just listened to interviews with some of the key founders. For example, like Stephen Portis, the founder of political theory. I listened to Julie and John Gottman interviews. I listen to interviews a lot.
And
Spotify.
and are there any so far that have like stood out to you in particular?
I think the one with Gabor Maté stood out to me a lot because he spoke about how much our childhood has an impact on us as we grow into an individual ourselves. He talks about trauma, talks about childhood. Yeah.
Yeah, tell us more about that. What were some of your key takeaways from that interview?
The key takeaways, like I think the main one that stood out to me is that if he has this quote, he said, not verbatim, but he has this quote saying that if we are not held as an individual when we are a child, we grow up have to learn how to hold ourselves. So he was referring to coping mechanisms that we developed because we have to in order to survive our childhood, and how these coping mechanisms may not serve the function as we grow into adults.
That's so interesting, and I might give it a listen myself. Now, my last question for you before we end off this section is: who do you look up to the most, either in your professional life or your personal life?
Who do I look up to? I have a twin, and we are all. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I don't know why I give that that reaction all the time. It's like it's really not necessary.
No, that's kind of fun.
Yeah,
I'm very familiar with such. I have a twin, and she looks like me and everything, and we are only 15 minutes apart. But I do look
Mhm.
up to her because she's struggling with so many roles, right? As a mother, she works as a financial planner.
Mhm.
She has what 4,000, probably 4,000 clients privately, and I'm only juggling with 50 clients. I'm already like crazy, maintaining
Yeah.
supporting them. She's 4,000, so yeah.
Oh my gosh, 4,000 clients. How does she do that? It
And she's really good at time management. Yeah.
Right. That's incredible. And she's a mom too. So that's she sounds really busy. Um, but it also does sound a bit like typical like Singaporean work-life balance of like working a lot. But some people thrive. Some people thrive in that environment. So it's nice to see people who can live like that. I definitely can't. I I do not have 33 clients in any form at all. So but yeah, thank you for telling us all about yourself. I feel like we got to know you a bit better, and now we'll move on to the interview section. My first question for you is, what is a relationship?
What is a relationship? That's a very good question because I like to start with sessions saying that we have a relationship with someone when we go to the funeral, we see death funeral and we would cry. But we walk through a funeral of a stranger, we don't
Mhm.
necessarily have the same emotional reaction.
Yeah.
So when we have an emotional bond with someone, it means that we have a relationship with that particular person, be it
Yeah.
a parent, child, be it a partner A, partner B, could be a child teacher. So yeah,
Yeah. And more specific to what we're talking about today, what qualifies as an intimate relationship?
so many levels of definition because it's such a it could be a podcast in itself. What level of intimacy? It can be a physically intimate relationship. It can be an emotional one. It can be an intellectually intimate one. So I guess there are
Yeah.
many types of intimacy in a relationship.
Yeah, for sure. And how would you define violence?
When we think of violence, straight away we think of hitting, instead of thinking of very physical level of abuse. But it can be an emotional one. Emotional one where our emotions are being manipulated for them to get what they want to get out. Or it can be spiritual. So all these things, I would
Mhm.
see that as a part of violence where we feel violated.
Yeah. And is there like a prerequisite where it has to be intentional for it to be considered violence?
That's the thing. I think most people who are the aggressor, they don't realize that they are abusing.
Mhm.
Some of them, they just blindly replicating what they experienced as a child. It could be just a generational pattern that they carry on. So it might not be intentional, but there are times where it is intentional. There are more complex cases where they are aggressors, they are being intentional to push the person away.
Yeah.
Just go away from me because I'm not safe. I'm not even safe for myself.
And what kind of effect does violence have on relationships?
I have clients who stay in very violent relationships for years and they get out of it. So effects would be you just totally lose a sense of self because you don't know your worth anymore. You don't know if your whole life is tied to this relationship. Then your whole life is about this relationship. You couldn't imagine living without the person. So it's no more sense of self. I think that's the greatest impact of violence in relationships.
Yeah. And I know this is probably a loaded question, which can take forever to answer, but what are some of the main reasons people stay in violent relationships?
Okay. So for any violent or violent relationship, it can turn into a codependent relationship because the person can get violent because the other partner enables it, right? So or allows it,
Yeah.
or right. when this person allows it and she gets the treatment, and he or she gets that dopamine high or feeling of being autonomy. I'm in charge, I'm in control. And so it kind of fit into each other. I would say it's almost like a child. That's where people start in relationships as such. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And with regards to the words to wounds pathway, how does one differentiate between healthy conflict resolution and manipulation or passive aggressiveness that could lead to violence in the future?
Right. So if it's a passive aggressive kind of communication, it, it can be manipulative because it suggests that you need to do this. If there's a lot of threats there, if you don't do this, I will leave. So if you say this, I would, for example, I would tell all your dirty stories to everyone. So there's a lot of threats there to this, and there's a power play involved. That's I'm there, I'm here. So for healthy conflict resolution happens when the couples they are able to regulate their own emotion, being aware of what is really happening, and so when we can't fix what we don't know, so when they're aware, then they can work on themselves, their own triggers, their own probably trauma
Yeah.
from the past. Yeah.
And could you share some examples of conflicts in relationships that have transitioned into violence? What are some of the early signs of potential violence in a relationship, if any? If there's a way to even
It start with
point
small
that out.
things. Start with small
Yeah.
things like pinching. Start with small
Yeah.
things like pinching, smacking, or hair
Yeah.
pulling, or things like that. So this can I give you an example that happened
Yes, please.
before? So without really revealing anything identifiable. So I have this couple where they're together for more than 20 years. So she recently found out that the husband cheated on her. So she been reading the messages. She's been cheated on for about more than 10 years. So he's been with the other person for more than 10 years. So upon finding out, she started going berserk. She just lost it. And she started kicking, not punching, but she was standing up on the chair and started kicking the husband in the session with me. So there's no longer any social mask that she's wearing with me because she doesn't care how she looked like in front of me anymore. I had to physically stop the fight in front of me in the session.
Oh, wow. So how is that resolved?
It was resolved by getting her. So I told her that being she's very angry. So I first started with validating how she feels because she feels like she's the victim for so many years. She has sacrificed so much, and now she's lost everything. So she feels to resolve to such big, explosive to justify her hurt, right?
Yeah.
So I told her that there are many better ways to express that. If you
Yeah.
do this, the consequence would be you becoming the abuser, you becoming the person who's being violent.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took me a while to regulate her, to ground her before having one-on-one sessions before being able to have that couple session together.
That is such a complex situation just because I feel like anyone who's ever been through infidelity on their partner's part, they can understand that hurt, but at the same time, physical violence is never the answer. So it's just yeah, and with that being said, v- everyone wants to feel like their emotions are valid. They need to hear it from someone. If her husband's not going to validate her emotions, someone has to get her to um, calm down a little bit and to feel a bit better. Um, so with that, are there any specific triggers or stresses that tend to increase the likelihood of violence?
I think if the client themselves has a history of violence in previous relationships with their parents, for example, then they are more likely to repeat the behavior because that's how they have learned to deal with such hurt, right? Or to deal with fear of abandonment. For you not to abandon me, I would do anything to keep you, something like that. So that's where, for them, what I do with that would be to first ask about the family history, ask about how their own parents deal with such emotional hurt. Yeah, so that's
Right.
where I start with. Yeah.
And what role does communication play in these circumstances? For example, if in a couple there's a partner that has that kind of violent childhood, what can the other party do to kind of I don't really want to say help their partner, but kind of point these things out? Is there a way to communicate this?
Okay. So the first thing to communicate is to call it out by saying, I'm not here to go against you. We are a team. We are in a partnership. I am not going to hurt you. So I need you to express not hurting me so that we can work this through together. So to call the pain out, to call out the nature of the relationship. I'm not against you. Yeah. So that help in terms of communication.
And is this the only way to resolve such an issue? Are there other ways to do it?
Yes. So for couples, it is important for them to not be in a codependent relationship where their lives are too intertwined together to the point where they can't be their own person outside of the relationship. For this, I have this analogy I use with couples a lot. So couples are like two poles supporting a roof, right? So they can't be too close. If you're too close, then you're not really supporting the roof really well. So it's best to have space between them. So it means that they're able to be their own person outside of the relationship.
Yeah. And when they are when they're able to be their own person out of the relationship, what kind of effect does that have on the two people involved?
Okay, that's a good question. So when they have their own lives outside of the relationship, they are not totally dependent emotionally on the couples often say this. They say that I need you to make me happy. So if you need the other person to make you happy, it means that you don't have your own resources to make yourself happy. So I will encourage my couples to be able to meet their own emotional needs before turning to each other to support each other. So by having a life outside, for example, to have your own interests, like rock climbing or martial art, perhaps to have a life, to do your work, so that when they go home and be together, they have something to talk about.
Yeah. That also sounds like it might help with regulating emotions, because when you depend solely on one person for emotion, if you're having like a disagreement and it's heated, you feel like everything in your life is wrong because all of your
Yep.
emotions are dependent on one thing.
Yes, correct. Yes,
Right.
you want to
That makes a
spread it
lot of
out.
sense. Yeah. And when dealing with relationship violence, how important is creating a safe and non-judgmental therapeutic space? How important is that, and how do we achieve that?
Wow, that's tough. So especially when if okay, an open non-judgmental space would be a space where I like this theory called a person-centered theory, where this is developed by Carl Rogers, where we extend that unconditional positive regard to our clients. It means to say that this person could have been a pedophile, could be a killer, a rapist, or whoever. We learn to see them as humans who also feel pain, emotional pain, physical pain. So for the couple, if one is an aggressor, would resort to violence, would resort to name callings and stuff, usually carry a lot of shame, a lot of guilt because they deep down, intellectually, they know it's wrong. They know it's not right. So there's a lot of what we call moral injury to their own identity. So my job is to hold that open, non-judgmental space for them to, for him or her to feel safe, to be themselves and talk about, really go down to the human level and talk about how they feel.
Yeah. That is incredibly complex. I've said it before, and I guess I've said it again. But it is incredibly complex. I mean, especially if you've been the receiver of these deeds, extending that unconditional positive regard and um, well, like it sounds almost horrible to say like to treat them or see them as humans irrespective of what they've done is difficult, but when you've been the direct receiver of these, it is pretty hard to get past it, and so for those people in that type of situation, what advice do you have for them?
Okay, this is what I say. I say all behaviors, underneath the behaviors, there is a need. When there is an unmet need, for example, the need to feel understood, the need to feel accepted for who they are.
Mhm.
So there's always a reason that they are so violent towards you. For example, if I'm talking to the person, there's always a reason why this person is behaving in such a way. Most of
Mhm.
the time, it speaks about their own personality and decision, not about yours. It is not that
Mhm.
you're not good enough. It is not that you're not attractive enough or anything like
Mhm.
that. It's more about their own trauma. It's more about their own inner self.
Yeah.
We do con.
Yeah, that sounds like something that you've got to like remind yourself every single day just to drill it in, because it's like almost an innate part of being a human is the first thing you do is to think that it's to do with you, and it is
Because each person wants you, right?
yeah, it's also because I feel like if we don't know everything that's going on in somebody's head, we do make up, not, I don't want to say make up stories, but kind of we
We
have
have a
our
term for it.
own.
We call it
Yeah.
we call it confabulation, where we see like
Ah,
yeah, that's confabulation where we insert information or we assume things or we connect
right,
the dots when there is no connection. We just connect the dots. Like,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. It feels just so automatic to do that as a human being. But what are some of the challenges? What are some of the common challenges, which s- sounds, it feels like an oxymoron asking this question, just because we've been talking about a topic that clearly has so many so many challenges, and it feels like everything that we've been talking about has been one huge challenge after another, but when, for example, a couple is looking to seek therapy, or even one of the parties in a violent relationship is looking to seek therapy or help, um, what are some of the challenges they would face or they have to expect?
They have to expect that the other party is going to get defensive
Mm,
because there's a lot of what we call self righteousness. Because when you feel hurt, there's a lot of self righteousness to it. I have the right to feel what I feel. So that one of the challenges is to put this self righteousness or feelings of self righteousness aside and look at the direction that we both want, like the couple wants to go.
yeah.
If the goal is to get to grow as a couple, to work things out and grow as a couple, they need to see themselves as a team instead of you versus me. We need to see this is we are together. We are together. Not I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've mentioned before, one of like a large misconception about the conflict to violence pathway. Could you share some more misconceptions that you've heard or seen people have about violence?
Okay. Another misconception about violent relationships is that um the aggressor is always the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always the bad guy because I mean, most of the time after the violent episode, it comes with so much guilt and shame.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone is not in the right headspace, it's very hard for them to be in control of anything. They are not rational, they're not thinking straight. Of course, it's easy for me to say as the therapist, of course, for the victims, very hard to accept. I'm not asking the couple to accept because it's not right. It's not right because it's hurting one another. So I think one of the misconceptions is the aggressor is always a bad guy. It's not even about good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more about like because relationships are complex, and there's a lot of like history and past that intertwines with your current actions and what like how you react now. So it's not as black and white as it looks. So that does make a lot of sense. Now, how does your experience as a martial arts instructor intersect with your counseling practice when dealing with conflict and violence?
So there are times in my I don't speak for other martial arts, but in my martial art, ninjutsu, we talk a lot about intent, like the intent to hurt. If we are in danger, it is important. It is very important for us to have that intent. And most of the time, we live in a world that is so safe, that is so nice, that we don't have that intent to protect ourselves when needed. Right? When we are being held against the wall, we need to be able to do something instead of going into freeze mode. When most traumatic times we go into dissociation, we go into freeze mode, and they're unable to protect themselves. So my martial art comes into play where it talks about awareness of the intent. So I use that idea of intention in with my clients as well.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. Now, before we end off, I just have one last question for you, which is what are some of the early warning signs to look out for in a violent relationship, a potentially violent relationship, and when when is it time to call it quits?
Many times the code quits when for so we're usually the early signs would be for the aggressor, we to feel your heartbeat racing. There's this heat behind the back of your neck. It's usually your body telling you that you are getting angry and you're going to explosion. Something that you won't like yourself afterwards. So for the victim, if you see this explosion, leave the house or just leave the space to protect yourselves. Because once you are in that moment when you're being pinned down or being smashed, then you can't help yourself. Yeah, so to get out of the space. This is a telltale sign where things are really wrong. You need to re-examine the relationship. They either use therapy or it's better if them together.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your advice. That was a very insightful conversation. And now we're moving on to the practice slash habits section. Now, first question for you is what is a practice that you do, either as the aggressor or the victim, which now I realize is a very oddly phrased question. But essentially, what advice would you give? What habit would you recommend the aggressor or the victim practicing when navigating conflict in an intimate when navigating conflict to violence in intimate relationships?
What are the practices is to put a pause between a trigger and an action. So most of the time when we are triggered, we feel the need to do something, to act out, or to do something something. When you have to have that pause. Right? So when we have that pause, then we have a chance to do it ourselves. So that is a good practice. Another good practice is to, of course, when we are not regulated, we feel so overwhelmed. field expert. Another practice is repair.
Mhm.
To get good at repairing after an argument or even a violent issue is to repair.
And what are the challenges when doing these practices?
Challenges would be depends on it. Depends on how extreme the fight has gone to. If it's beyond help, then it's time to call it quits. If it's not quite there, it the challenge would be to take accountability. Take accountability how I myself have contributed to the problem.
Right. Yeah. That does sound like it would take you out of that like mellowing emotional headspace of like I'm like the all of this has gone wrong for me, and like, this is all this one person's fault. So it does sound like it would give some perspective. But based on your experience, are there any other habits or practices that you recommend?
Okay. I'm I like to encourage my clients to meditate, but not sitting down like kind of thing. It's more like even not looking at your phone and just
Yeah.
take a walk. Take
Yeah.
a walk and engage with yourself.
Yeah.
Notice what you're feeling. Notice what comes up in your mind. Are you self-blaming? Are you talking yourself down? Just be examining, having that what we call an observant self, like almost like a third eye watching,
Yeah. It's kind of
examining.
like push your mind out of your body and like watch yourself kind of experience, which meditating, it's really interesting how meditating, there's such a warped perspective about meditating by the like general masses. I also had that. I definitely had that perception of meditating until very recently. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was an incredibly insightful discussion. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be related to the topic at all. So the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you. I think this month the theme I'm focusing for myself is authenticity. Myself and the book that I do with my clients. I want to work on allowing them, holding that space for them, safe enough to be authentic. So this is what recently I have had sessions with someone who's incarcerated. And so this particular client, he was charged and was asked to go for mandatory counseling. So he was telling me about how he has this urge it's so uncontrollable urge to, to just burst out in vulgarities in public. That's where he was charged. But it's so he couldn't catch it. It's almost like a thought fly by that we can't even catch it.
Yeah.
So that's what he was describing. This happens after a few sessions because he doesn't know how to perceive him. So when I'm able to hold that knowledge in space for him, he starts telling me his fears. He's actually very afraid of himself, saying things like that. So I sent him to a psychiatrist for assessment, and it turns out that he has what we call I don't know the name of the disorder. He has that diagnosis, particular disorder, but he just automatically bursts out like that. So he's on meds now, and it's much better. So I think that when I allow my clients to be authentic, then they can talk about what they struggle with. Then they can talk about what they need help with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a lot easier to narrow down or like zone in on what the issue is when you feel like you're safe with somebody. So that's great to hear that you managed to provide that space for your clients. And how did your interest in this notion of embracing authenticity, or like placing a bit more emphasis on authenticity, how did that start?
Start with my rabbits actually, because
Oh.
I know because they're so authentic. They don't even need to people please, right? They just They just throw the word. This is why you like it a lot. When they're so authentic. So that's where I learn a lot from them. So that's
Yeah.
where I pick them up.
Oh, that is adorable. And how long have you had your rabbits?
Yes, I actually got them because they were abandoned. Yeah,
Oh,
but I look,
yeah.
yeah, one of
Yeah.
them was bald before. There was no fur at all. But
Yeah. Oh, that is so sweet. I have a cat myself, and I feel like I have that same sentiment with my cats because, like rabbits, they don't really care like what you think of them. Sometimes my cat can be really manipulative with like getting food, but that's the only time he pretends to be something that he's not. Um,
yeah,
uh, yeah. So I definitely feel you with that, with the like looking up to animals, the last beings that you think that you look up to as like almost role models or like muses for what you do in life. But we definitely can learn a thing or two from our furry friends and furry little babies. Um, yeah, there's always something to learn from like everywhere you turn. I feel like in life, if you don't have the mindset of like just learn something everywhere you look, you know, it's going to be a very not that interesting life. So,
yep. When we have
but
an open mind, we can learn, we can grow.
yeah, exactly. When you have an open mind, can learn anything from anywhere. Thank you so much for the chat, Hui Wen. It was great to have you on the show today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
They can go to my website www.stain101.com.
All right, we'll link it in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you learned a bit more about the conflict to violence pathways and what to do, what not to do in these situations. And we'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.